Welcome back to Native Tongues, which I'm told has just been voted the greatest podcast of all time. No need to Google that. I'm your host, Aaron Palmer, and I am joined, as always, by my pal and co-host, Ken Hall. Please take a second to subscribe and rate and review us on Apple Podcasts. Goes a long way. Now, our guest this week is a New York Times best-selling author with a few different series of books under his belt, 3 books written alongside James Patterson. His newest novel about to be released is an erotic thriller called Behind a Closed Door. He also hosts the popular writing podcast, Writers Inc. And for such a successful and well-connected person, he's incredibly humble. Let's welcome to the pod, J.D. Barker.
I've got this new Zoom setup, well, kind of a temp setup. Zoom sent me like a monitor that's mounted on my wall that has like Zoom built into the TV. So like I just have to sit down in front of it and just tap something. So it's like super easy.
Yeah.
Wow. But they're upgrading me to 4K because it died. So like this is like this week is the first time I'm actually using an actual computer to do Zoom. My IT skills have gone to shit since I turned 50.
I feel better about that. I feel so much better about that. Like, I don't know if I need Zoom in 4K, to be honest with you. I don't talk to good enough looking people, present company excluded, of course. Need a 4K TV for Zoom.
I'm sure there's probably something there where I can blur myself up and change my background and all those kind of fun things. But
Yeah, there you go. You got a good background, though. Books on books on books.
That's my COVID bookcase. Like when you lock me in my house for a pandemic, I build bookcases.
Wow.
So I built that one. I've got another one in the other room. That's one of those 2-story ones with a ladder and stuff on it.
Are you kidding? Really?
Yeah.
Do you live in a castle?
It's a big house. We can talk. My wife and I were, we can probably, I don't know what you want to go into, but with my backstory, like I've got a lot of real estate stuff.
Okay.
And we bought this abandoned house on an island in New England, 7,000 some square feet. And we had to take it all the way down to the studs and rebuild it. So it's castle size, but it's two and a half year renovation in order to get it to where it is now.
Wow.
All I can picture is at some point there's a room that has a rose that's in a glass case. And every year a petal of the rose falls off.
I need that.
Oh gosh.
So we've joked before about broadcasting from, secret locations. You're literally in a secret location. You're like on an island right now?
Yeah. So I'll give you the backstory on real quick. So my last real job, I was a chief compliance officer at a brokerage firm down in Florida, which is as horrible as it sounds.
Wow.
But it pays really good. And I was kind of trapped because of it. My salary was big. So we had we had the house, we had cars, we had a boat, basically the lifestyle supported by that salary. But like the monthly nut to keep it all going was high.
Yeah, sounds like it.
So I couldn't walk away from the career. I was just kind of trapped. So I would come home at night and I would write. So I was working as a book doctor and a ghostwriter. I was working on my own stuff, but like writing is kind of what kept me sane, while dealing with that world. And I did that for 20 some years, a really long time. I ended up with 6 different books that hit the New York Times bestseller list, all with other people's names on the cover over those 2 decades. And that gets old after a while. You walk into Barnes and Noble and see a book on the front shelf that you wrote or worked on, and it's got somebody else's name.
Yours also on there, or were these all like ghostwriting?
No, these were strictly my, totally behind the scenes type stuff. My name didn't appear anywhere in the credits or anything like that.
Are you allowed to say what any of them were?
No, there's NDAs there. I've had a lot of people ask, and I wish I could talk about it, but no. So anyway, the 6th one hit up. My wife pulled me aside. She's like, I know you want to be a writer. I know that's what you really want to do. This career that you're doing now is killing you. Like, we need to find a way to make this work. So she came up with this crazy plan. She's like, let's sell everything that we own. We'll buy a duplex in Pittsburgh because she had family there. Rent out one side, live in the other, downsize, and then just try to live off of savings. And that's exactly what we did. We bailed and got rid of every possession that we had other than, what we could basically fit in a car and a small U-Haul trailer, moved into an 800 square foot apartment. And then I remember her sitting me down at the dining room table and showing me the bank statement. And she's like, it looks like we've got enough in here for you to maybe last about 18 months or so. So to make this writing thing work.
Go.
So, go. Yeah. Nothing like putting your feet to the coals, in order to make something happen. And I got lucky. I mean, the first book, I ended up indie publishing it, but it sold a lot of copies. It sold about 250,000 copies. that was enough to throw me on the radar of all the traditional publishers. So when I wrote my second book, The Fourth Monkey, I ended up scoring a 7-figure deal on that with the TV show and film attachment.
Jeez.
And it's just been, I basically stepped on the very fast treadmill and haven't gotten off yet.
Well, it's funny because you say, sorry, I just want to go back to, because like, it's funny in hindsight, like you just took, like you did this for 20 years and then we just transitioned, to this other, made this just quick change and did that. And then got back. I'm like, holy cow, that's like, these are major life decisions that you're making to like change the whole trajectory of what you're doing.
I couldn't keep doing it. Like the corporate world was just killing me, like getting up every day and having to deal with that. And like a compliance officer at a brokerage firm is very similar to the person who's responsible for lost luggage at the airport. Like nobody wants to talk to you. They're glad you're there when you're there because you can solve a problem, but that's all you're doing is solving problems.
Yeah, you're regulatory.
Yeah, I mean, I was testifying in front of the SEC. I had to deal with state regulators, federal regulators. Somebody would die, and I had to deal with the heirs. The lawyers would come after him. Divorces, I had to deal with the spouses trying to get to the assets, and there was nothing fun about it. Most people in that career last maybe 5 to 10 years at most, and I did it for 20. I don't know how I'm still alive. I've got 2.5 degrees. I've got one in finance, another one in business. I got halfway through a psychology degree, and now I basically get paid to make shit up. So life can take some very weird turns.
And sometimes you got to pull the ripcord and know when to do it.
Yeah,
yeah, there you go.
I honestly, I constantly tell people that, because the years fly by. I'm 53 now, and it feels like I was in my 20s a week ago. And, if there's something you want to do in life, I think you got to find a way to make it happen because, before you know it, you're sitting on that porch in the rocking chair going, oh, I wish I would have done this or that or whatever. And I just, that was a big catalyst for me. I wanted to turn it around. Like I just didn't see myself going forward, doing that career. I wanted to be a writer and I knew I had to make it work.
That's an increasing fear for me every day, thinking about the things I want to do and, the time I have to do them. It's funny. We just talked to someone else too, who has written 5 books now in his 50s. He was given the same advice, it's not too late. Put your head down, start writing, start working on it. You can do it.
The thing is, even though I was in my 40s or so when I actually started the writing professionally, if I would have done it sooner, I don't know that the books would have taken off as well because I had 20 years of practice.
Mm-hmm.
People often say I was an overnight success, and it was a 20-year in the making overnight success. And without that practice behind me, I don't know that I would have been as good. So if I would have started publishing in my 20s, I might have had to reverse it. I might be the chief compliance officer today, thinking about my years as a writer. The early days.
Thinking I should get back to that.
Yeah.
So the first book that took off with the indie market, you can be the best writer in the world, but that doesn't mean you're going to sell anything. How in the world did you sell 250,000 copies?
I have to thank Stephen King for that. So in the book, the book, it's a horror novel. And in the story, I had to explain where the wife buys a journal. And just to get that last page down on paper, I wrote that she walked into Needful Things, Stephen King's store from his book and bought it there. Yeah. Fully expected to have to change that because you can't do that sort of thing without, a bunch of lawyers pounding on your door and, waving papers in your face. Sure. But my wife read it and she's like, no, this is good. We need to just try and get his permission to use it. Sure. How do you get Stephen King's permission to do much of anything? Turns out he's got a house in Florida that was about 10 minutes from my mom's house. So when we were down there visiting, we printed up the manuscript. We hopped in the rental car and, figured, well, we'll just drive over to Steve's house. He'll be outside gardening or something. I'll show him the book. He'll give me a thumbs up. We'll be on our way by lunchtime and, all good. So he lives on, it's basically an island right off the coast called Casey Key. And you go over this tiny little bridge. And if you make a left, you're on the public portion of the island. So the bars, the restaurants, the hotels, stuff like that. If you make a right, you basically turn into the entire half of this island that he owns. And at first there's a private drive sign. Then there was a no trespassing sign. And, the road starts getting more and more narrow. Then there's a gate and another gate.
Say armed guards.
Yeah. I'm hunched over the steering wheel, looking up into the trees, thinking a sniper is going to take us out if we keep going. So we eventually turned around. We didn't actually get to his house. We went to one of the restaurants and I called a friend of mine, a guy named Jack Ketchum that he wrote under Jack Ketchum. His real name was Dallas Mayer. He passed away a few years ago. Really cool guy that had been in the writing world for a long time and knew King.
And thrillers, right?
Yeah, he wrote thrillers. He wrote horror. The Girl Next Door is probably his most famous one.
Huh.
But I called him up. I told him what I was doing, and he's like, "Oh yeah, don't stalk Steve. He hates that kind of thing." He goes, "Here's his email address. Just send him the book. If he likes it, you'll hear back from him. If the book's shit, he probably won't respond. But just leave him alone." So I sent the book off, and a couple of days later, I got an email back from King. He's like, I love this. Go ahead and use it. Let me know if you need anything." And like I stared at that email for like a week waiting for like the retraction, like, oh, I meant that for Grisham, not you. Sorry,
Yeah,
my
right.
bad. But it never came, So
Like, did I spell Stephen King right? Did I send
yeah.
you the right Stephen King?
Yeah, I started thinking that maybe Dallas gave me the wrong email address. He's just pulling some kind of joke on me, like he's on the other side laughing. But
Yeah,
no,
right.
it all turned out it was for real. So I got to keep those references in the book. Ended up publishing the book, and at first it didn't take off, but then my publicist got this idea. She's, like the story here is you trying to get to Stephen King. So she reached out to Publishers Weekly, and they actually wrote a story about me trying to get to King's House. And, mind you, it was a failed attempt. I never actually got there. I've emailed them back and forth a few times, but I've never actually spoken to them. But they wrote that up. And when that story hit, then libraries discovered the book, bookstores discovered the book, and that just completely lit it up. And that's basically what happened. I kind of captured lightning in a bottle there.
Wow.
That's great.
So then on to your second one. Did you have to chase down like an agent, a publisher? They come knocking on your door?
Well, the first book, the reason I had to self-publish is because I completely screwed up the whole query process. I wrote a query letter. I basically used a form letter. I bought a mailing list of agents. I just shot it out to all of them. I didn't look at their websites to see what they wanted. They all have their different specs. Like they want to see the first chapter, they want to see 3 chapters, they want a PDF, they want it part of the email.
Sure.
I didn't look at anything. I basically sent them a to whom it may concern letter. So I didn't get a whole lot of response. I didn't realize that I had actually done something wrong. I didn't know that wasn't how you did it. But that was why I self-published the book. So with the second book, with those sales numbers behind me, my wife again pulled me aside. I had done well as an indie author. Like the finances there, you actually, you make about 70 cents on the dollar. So the economics are pretty strong. And I had intended to indie publish the second book. And my wife said, well, let's just query a couple agents and see what happened. I shot off, it was 53 letters. This time I did research them, and I ended up getting 13 offers within about a week or two. I felt like the kid at high school plays football really good, and like all the colleges were kind of chasing after me.
Yeah,
I ended up, I signed with a woman named Kristen Nelson, who was a little bit of a dark horse because she's in Colorado. She's not actually located in New York.
Yeah.
But when I started researching her, there's a website called Publishers Marketplace where you can actually pull up the stats on agents. You can see what they've sold, how much money they've gotten for those books. I started to research her and realized she had a very small stable of authors, but for each of them, she had gotten very large 6-figure deals or 7-figure deals, all with film and TV. She had taken a lot of them from nothing to New York Times bestsellers. So she was very good at cultivating a new voice.
Yeah.
So I ended up signing with her, and, she did a phenomenal job.
That's awesome. It's good that you did some research and didn't just kind of take the first thing that came along or the flashiest thing.
Did you immediately look back at what you had done the first time and were like, oh my gosh, what was I thinking?
Yeah, well, at that point, I knew I had screwed up.
Okay.
Plenty of people had told me exactly what I did wrong.
That's good, though. I think that's really important.
Yeah, I mean, that's one of the reasons why I talk about it, because, a lot of this stuff isn't talked about, and like, you don't learn this until you make the misstep. And like, I'd rather, hopefully catch somebody else before they do the exact same thing.
Yeah, sure.
Kristen actually taught me a lot of different things about agents. One of the weird fun facts is, like, do you guys know when the best time to actually query an agent is? Like, best time of the week?
No idea.
So it's Thursdays at 11 in the morning. And there's logic behind this. So she told me that when she comes, almost everybody queries over the weekend, because most wannabe authors have day jobs, so that the first chance they get to actually do that is Saturday or Sunday. So she came in, and pretty much any agent comes in the morning on Monday, and they've got an inbox that's just flooded with query letters. They just start flying through them. So imagine stepping into your own office. You hit delete on that first one, then the next one, and the next one. Before you know it, you're deleting stuff without even reading it. So she flies through them. But like, if you wait, Thursday at 11 o'clock, by 11 o'clock, you basically knocked out everything you're going to do in the morning. So your inbox is empty. You're kind of waiting on lunchtime. You're not starting anything new because the weekend is coming up. So it's kind of the perfect time to slip a query letter in front of an agent. The other thing I learned is, try to avoid the norm, because a lot of people, when they write a query letter, they go out on Google, what is the perfect query letter? And, basically the same format comes up over and over again, and everybody sticks to that format. That becomes old too. I've got a friend of mine who he wrote a book, a thriller set in New York, and he actually works security in New York. Like, that's his day job. When a diplomat is visiting from another country, he's on that protection detail. So he kind of wrote a Jason Bourne type story. So I had him take his query letter and completely change it around. And his first sentence was, "I carry a gun in New York." And trust me, any agent that stumbled into that in their inbox, they stopped, to read what was coming next, So when I work with new authors, I try to get them to tweak those kind of things a little bit, come up with something that's different from what everybody else is doing.
That's clever.
It's marketing sales side of things for what
Absolutely
you're doing as well.
Yeah.
So take it a step back. you were ghostwriting and you were doing like script doctoring or book doctoring. How'd you even get into that?
Yeah,
Yeah,
I was about to ask, how do you get the
Oh.
ghostwriting gig?
Now we gotta go into the Wayback Machine to really get into this stuff. So
yeah.
when I went off to college, my parents told me you can't make a living as a writer. You need to get a real job, which is why I ended up in finance. But I was in business school.
Have any parents ever said, "Go for it, be a
No.
writer. This is really lucrative"?
Yeah, be a writer, be an actor, write poetry,
Yes,
go
yes.
go enjoy your no parent says that. So, but I wanted to be in that world. So when I was in college, I was in Fort Lauderdale. My first school was Art Institute of Fort Lauderdale, and I went to University of Miami. But one of my first jobs down there, I worked for BMG Records, or BMG Distribution, which was the division arm of RCA Records. And I was essentially a glorified babysitter. So when they had an artist that came into town, I'd have to pick them up at the airport, get them to their hotel, get them to the radio stations for their interviews, get them to their concert, and get them back on that airplane and out of town when it was all over. If you've ever seen the movie Get Them to the Greek, that was essentially that was my life.
Exactly about to say that.
Now, to really date myself, the first ones that I had to do this with were people like Tiffany and Debbie Gibson, New Kids on the Block.
Oh, wow.
Then we started getting the hair bands. We had Bon Jovi, Poison, Motley Crue. If I had like Guns N' Roses, if they came into Fort Lauderdale and I managed to keep them out of jail for a full week and back on their airplane, in time to leave, like that was a win for me.
I was going to say it's like ramped up degree of difficulty. It's
Yeah,
like,
it
start
was-
with Tiffany and Debbie Gibson. Okay, you did great. Let's see how you do with level 2.
It was crazy. But, I realized I had some of these people in the car with me as a captive audience for, sometimes a week. Like Skid Row was down there for over a month recording an album, so I was with them the whole time. So I started interviewing them, all these different people. And then I would chop up the interview and sell it to various magazines. So Teen People, Teen Beat, Tiger Beat, all these old magazines from the day. I'd interview somebody like Madonna and turn it into 10 different paychecks.
Did BMG know you were doing that?
Not a clue. No. I'm pretty sure that would have been frowned upon activity, and there would have been a talking to from HR.
Yeah.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah, but like when you work with anybody, in newspapers or magazines, like you quickly realize they've all got a manuscript in a desk drawer somewhere that they've been working on forever. It's 500,000 words long. They've been working on it for 10 years. It's almost done. It just needs a little bit of work. I kind of became the go-to guy that they would show that stuff to because I was very good with punctuation and grammar, and I could, kind of give them some ideas as far as how to develop the story. So people just started handing me manuscripts and I would edit them for them, and just kind of, that's sort of where that started. And then word of that eventually got around, and I started getting phone calls from agents. Like an agent would get a manuscript that was turned in and it was really good, but not quite, what an editor wanted. It needed a little something. And a lot of times authors are just too close. If you tell an author, your dialogue is terrible, or, you combine these two characters, take 50,000 words out. Like, many first time authors can't do that. But they would bring me in as a hired gun. Like I had no problem doing it. It wasn't my book. So I would just kind of tweak it. And the cool thing about that is when you have conversations with editors, like if you're an author and you have a conversation with an editor, they sugarcoat everything. If they've got to tell you something bad, they're going to tell you 3 things that are good. Then they're going to sneak in the one bad thing, and then, finish up your phone call with 5 more good things, and kind of sandwich it. Yeah, they sandwich it. But when they hired somebody like me, they didn't sugarcoat anything. Like this guy can't write dialogue to save his life. This part needs to go. And I had so many of these conversations. I really got a good handle on what, the folks in New York were looking for in a publishable book, like what they felt could really sell. And it wasn't just the editors. A lot of times the marketing people would weigh in on those conversations. Like this book it's a combination thriller, but it's also got romance. We need to lean in one way or the other. We can't do both because we can't sell it as both. So like all that knowledge just over the years, I guess I just kind of absorbed it and learned to work it into my own writing process.
How receptive were the authors to any of these changes?
Well, in many cases, they didn't have a choice. If an agent hired me and I made those changes and they submitted the book and then it sold, they went with it.
Yeah.
They're not going to say no. I mean, it eventually turned into other things. I had one that was a New York Times bestseller. He was under contract and he had to go out on a book tour. He was only halfway done with his new book. They gave me the first half of the book and the outline for the rest and said, go ahead and write the rest. I'm autistic. I've got a form of autism called Asperger's. In today's world, you have to say you're on the spectrum. I don't think you're allowed to say Asperger's anymore. You get in trouble.
My wife's a speech therapist, so yeah.
Yeah, so I didn't find that out until I was 22. But like one of the superpowers that it gives me, and that's what my wife calls it, is I can mimic other people's voices. So if I read something that somebody else wrote, I can basically absorb their vocabulary, their cadence, their word choice, and I can recreate it.
Wow, that's interesting.
So it's come in very handy over the years, particularly working in this world. Some of the other ones that I've done memoirs for politicians, for sports figures. I often encourage people to try and do that because let's say if you've got access to like an NFL team anybody on that team that is doing well, like they could easily sell a memoir for a nice big advance, but chances are they don't have the writing ability to do it or the time to do it. But, if you approach them as a writer and say, hey, I will write this for you, most of the time they will do that. They'll take that big advance and they'll give you a nice big chunk of it in order to write that book. And it's honestly, it's easy work. You sit down, you interview them on tape, you've got the transcripts, you turn that into a novel or a memoir and go, so I did so many of those that word of it just sort of spread. I still get phone calls from people in the publishing world, even though I'm selling my own books now. They're like, hey, would you do a side project? I've got something you might want to do.
Yeah.
Is it fun for you still doing that level of things, or now that you've sort of dug into your own stuff,
Writing fiction for me is the best because everything else kind of still feels like work. It's fun work. It's not chief compliance officer work. Like this is the kind of stuff I can look forward to doing. But like sitting down working on my own novel like that's where it's at for me. That's where I really want to spend the time. I mean, at this point, I kind of turn everything down just to focus on my own stuff.
Right. And build your castle on the
island. Yeah. it didn't start out as a castle. I mean, we should probably talk about, because one of the other things that came up, and I talk to writers about this all the time. Like when the first book, sold, it did well, and then I got that advance check. I didn't know if this was going to continue or not. My wife, she's one of the smartest people I know. She's always pulling me in directions I wouldn't normally think of. But she took the money that came in and she put it into real estate. She's like, if the writing thing dies, at least we'll have some kind of passive income coming in. So, at first we bought some rental properties and then we bought some houses and started flipping them in the Pittsburgh area, because you could buy a house for 50 grand. You could put 50 in it and you could turn around and sell it for 2. It got to the point where I think at one point we had 8 houses all at the same time that we were renovating, mainly because it was easier to buy another house than it was to find like new plumbers and new electricians. Like it's easier to keep your team moving from house to house than to lose them and have to replace them.
Wow.
Huh. So over those years, we ended up flipping, I think it was 59 houses altogether. So we got a really good handle on it. And, the house that we're in now, like it was the ugliest house on the street. It was falling apart. There were raccoons living inside. There were holes in the roof, holes in the floor. The foundation was a mess. Nobody wanted it, which is exactly why we scooped it up.
Yeah.
Real estate's a great way for authors to make some passive income. The last thing you want to do is take those checks, put them in your checking account and just kind of spend them, because once it's gone, it's gone.
Yeah. It's not residual.
No, not at all.
So you're doing that. So you were actively like flipping houses and doing that and writing. So that was like, again, just like total shift. So you went from doing this sort of corporate world thing to like sell everything. Let's do this, make some money. And then all of a sudden now we are like sort of real estate, I wouldn't say moguls, but something like that, doing real estate stuff and also writing and all that. It's very interesting. It's a lot.
Yeah, that was all my wife. So like she handled the real estate stuff while I was off in the corner, making up stories.
She sounds pretty savvy.
Yeah, she still does it. I mean, we had a bunch of rental properties when COVID hit that she had to pivot a little bit, because when COVID hit, people basically decided paying rent was kind of optional. So like we had all these apartments and houses where we still had to pay the mortgage, whether somebody was paying us the rent or not. And that really scared her. It almost bankrupted us because it was just a big nut that hit all at once. So she unloaded most of them. Now we've got primarily Airbnbs and VRBOs, short-term rentals. And that, she seems to like.
Okay.
Yeah, that's a whole other podcast. That's a podcast called Bigger Pockets. It's fantastic if you ever want to get into that world.
Oh, you're serious? There really is?
Oh, yeah. Bigger Pockets is one of the best ones if you want to delve into any type of real estate activity.
Awesome. I'll check it out.
Writing is it's a weird thing, because you're on this roller coaster where you're watching your sales numbers. You're only as good as your last book.
Right.
There's so many different variables there. I feel like I've carved a little bit of a niche. I'm not tied to any particular publisher.
Yeah.
I've got a new deal with Simon & Schuster that basically is completely different from anything I've done in the past. So I'm scared of being caught in a box. I don't want to ever have to answer to an employer, and like a publisher could be an employer. At some point.
Yeah.
I've got plenty of friends that are caught on that treadmill too. You move out of the corporate world and you think you're a writer now, you're all set, but you're tied to that one publisher, your next 3-book contract, and it's
So we talked to someone else who's a writer who was saying that, he pretty much has meetings with his publisher and they decide on which idea he's going to move forward with. So he doesn't start writing until he has the green light. Is it the same for you, or like, do you keep a pipeline of projects?
It's like that now. So I've got a PDF document that's basically ideas that I want to write next.
Mm-hmm.
So I would sit down with, when it came time to pick, I would sit down with my agent and my editor, and we'd kind of go through that list and try to figure out what's going to sell well, 2 years from now, because, you're not really looking at today's market. You're looking at that. And that's kind of how it's worked. Recently I've changed things up quite a bit. I don't know if you're familiar with my whole publishing background, but with the first book I indie published, then the next 2 were traditionally published by HarperCollins. But I've always been kind of a free agent. And I had a serial killer series called The Fourth Monkey that sold really well. But initially, when Kristen, my agent at the time, took it out, we were just trying to sell a standalone. The reception that she got was very strong. She's like, "Do you have an idea for another book?" And I just quickly scribbled something out. So we ended up getting a 2-book deal on it. But when I actually wrote the second book, I realized I can't tell the full story with just this one book. I need to write at least one more. So I ended that second book with literally "to be concluded." Like that's the last 3 words in the book, which, a lot of people weren't very fond of.
Right. I was gonna say that's pretty baldy.
Especially if you don't already have the publishing deal.
Yeah, that's the thing. Yeah, so I wrote the third book, but there was no publishing deal behind it. So when it came time, she took the third book out there and shopped it, and like we were able to go to every publisher. We weren't tied to the one particular one. But I ended up pivoting a little bit because, I just didn't like the idea of being trapped with a publisher. There's a lot of turmoil going on in traditional publishing.
Mm-hmm.
So what I ended up doing with that title is I used my own imprint to publish it in English. So I basically self-published in the UK and US and Canada. And then we sold all the foreign rights to all the, the typical publishers because my books are in roughly about 150 different countries or so.
Wow.
So we sold all the foreign rights, but I kept all the English rights for myself. So it was basically a mishmash of self-published versus traditional published. And I realized that worked really well because what it allowed me to do is we circled back a year later. We looked at what countries hadn't picked it up yet. And in those countries, I hired my own translators and basically self-published in foreign languages and was able to fill those gaps on my own. So I started doing all that through my own imprint. And I did that for the next 3 books. I basically, kept all the English rights for myself and we sold off the foreign stuff. And then I wrote my latest title, which is called Behind a Closed Door. And we went and shopped it. And at that point, I was with a different agent. We took it out, and the reception there we got was really strong. The book is it's an erotic thriller, which is very different for me, but it's something that the folks in Hollywood had told me that they were really looking for. Had a lot of conversations, trying to figure out what they want.
Mm-hmm.
I've got 8 different books that are in various stages of Hollywood hell that nothing's actually been filmed yet. But it allows me to talk to a lot of directors and people in that world.
Anyone real interesting?
Oh, tons of them. But the problem with Hollywood is you're not allowed to talk about anything, like unless it appears publicly first. Like otherwise I get in trouble.
Yeah.
But anyway, so I wrote this erotic thriller. My agent started shopping it through the publishers. We started getting all of these phone calls from Hollywood, Netflix, HBO, like all these studios. Everybody was looking at this book. We ended up selling the film options pretty early on before a publishing deal came through. And then I got a phone call from a friend of mine who had worked at Penguin Random House for years. I think she was there for like 12 years. She said, "Listen, you're about to get an offer from us. You need to turn it down." And I was like, "Why?" And she's like, "Penguin Random House is about to lay off a bunch of people. And you don't want to get caught up in that because the editor that wants your book is going to be one of them."
Ooh. Oh my gosh. Wow.
So yeah, so that was a little scary because I've had that happen to friends. So, a lot of people don't realize this, but if a publisher picks up your book and that editor goes, unless another editor picks up the title, that book can get caught in limbo forever.
So did it just sit at the publisher with nobody sort of championing it?
Yeah, it can sit there, depending on your contract, it can be forever. I try to work clauses and stuff like that in there to protect myself. But, there's a lot of bad things that can happen. So that frightened me.
Yeah, but good on that person for, helping you out like that.
Yeah. Seriously.
Yeah. Then I got a similar phone call from somebody at HarperCollins telling me the exact same thing.
Oh, no.
And so I did a quick Zoom call with my agent. I was like, I'm not comfortable selling this book into the traditional world, not with this going on. And those layoffs happened. So I ended up picking the phone. I spoke to some people that I knew at Simon & Schuster. And basically told, I showed them my sales numbers, showed them what I've been doing as an indie author through my own imprint. And we basically struck a deal where I signed my imprint up through Simon & Schuster. They became the print and distribution arm for my own publishing company. So what that allows me to do now is I can put out my own books whenever I want. I can put out as many books as I want, but with Simon & Schuster as the backbone. And I honestly, I feel like this is the next evolution of indie authors, because if you know people that are in that world, the economics get very weird, because you make about 70 cents on the dollar as an indie author. You get maybe 10 to 20 cents if you're lucky as a traditionally published author. But if a big publisher comes to you and they offer you a big advance check, that's awesome. If it's life-changing money, I think every author should take it. But you have to realize that is an advance against sales. You have to pay it back. And if you're paying that advance back at, a small dollar amount, 10 or 20 cents on the dollar, it's going to take you a very long time to do it. You've got to sell a lot of books. So if you do the math, you figure out how many books you would have to sell that way, and then do the math to figure out how much you would make if you actually indie publish that title. In many cases, you end up selling more. So I know plenty of indie authors that are successful, where traditional publishers have reached out to them and they turn down the advance because it just doesn't make financial sense for them to go with them. But most of those sales are in ebooks. audio does well too, but it's primarily ebooks. Like we can't really do well on the print side because the margins just aren't there.
Right.
Most indie authors, they work with companies like Ingram Spark, where you're printing, basically one at a time. If somebody orders the book, they print that copy for that person and they ship it out. But that means you're paying top dollar for that book. Once you start making a little bit of money, you can print in bulk, so you can print 5,000 copies or 10,000 and you warehouse them, and then your margins get a little bit better. But through a deal like this, I'm basically paying Simon & Schuster prices, so like my cost for a print copy is far lower than anything I could have done on my own, which basically turns that into a profit center for me.
Sure.
From their standpoint, I'm taking the financial risk because I'm the publisher. So if I do a print run, so like this latest book, I have to pay for that out of pocket. Their neck's not on the line if it doesn't sell. It's me, but they're still collecting.
You use their resources so you go to them and say, here's my book, here's all the stuff I need. And you're essentially sort of buying 5,000 copies from them, and then they're distributing it as well. So you basically say, hey, I'll pay for all the publishing stuff, but you're going to publish it at your, whatever you normally publish, or
more or less,
you print your books at.
Yeah, I mean, it basically goes through, it basically becomes a Simon & Schuster title, from a business standpoint. Their salespeople go out with it. They talk it up at the bookstores and things like that. It's opened up the doors for, places like Walmart and Costco and CVS and places that as an indie, I could never get into. I'm able to do now.
Sure. Yeah, they've got that heavy distribution arm. And then,
yeah,
do they offer anything in the way of marketing? I mean, I assume that's a big component that they would offer that indie publishers can't.
Yeah. So again, that is back on me as the publisher. So I'm still doing my own marketing. I have to bring in my own PR people to do that. Oh. What they're basically doing is just the business side of it. So print, distribution, and then their sales team will take it out as part of their catalog. But, as far as drumming up press, that's still on me. But it's something I would have to do anyway. So like I honestly, like I said, I see this as the next logical step for people that are selling well on their own, because it allows us to get our books into places we couldn't get them before, into those particular venues, and turn print into a profit center. So I think you're going to see more authors that sell well independently striking deals like this. And from a publisher standpoint, I think you're going to see more publishers, gravitating towards this kind of thing because it makes sense for them too.
I think if it catches on, I mean, also if they're savvy enough, if they have the foresight enough, if they understand the economics and are willing to have that conversation. But I got to assume that the majority of authors probably don't have that knowledge.
No, which again is one of the reasons why I talk about it.
It's great.
We're all kind of fumbling around in the dark, and I think if anybody stumbles into something that's working, we should all talk about it.
Yeah, that's very cool.
It's an interesting industry because it changes so much, like so quickly.
Yeah.
We were just talking about like the whole Kindle Vella thing, and then like also just like the ebook stuff, and then like you were saying for audiobooks, all those things. It just seems like right when if you get good at one thing, like the whole thing changes.
Yep. Yeah, you just have to stay on top of it.
How did you end up with Patterson? How did that come about, that relationship?
So that was a fun conversation. I was working on, I can't remember what book I was actually working on, but I got a phone call from him, and like it was a Florida phone number, area code 412. Like I recognize it as Palm Beach from living down there. And I pick up and he's like, "Hey, it's Jim Patterson. You got a second?" I'm like, "Yeah, sure it is." I'm thinking it's one of my buddies pranking me or something. But
did you hang up on him?
I didn't hang up, but like as he started talking, I realized this might actually be him. And he basically gave me his review of The Fourth Monkey, which was one of my thrillers that I had written.
Wow. Yeah.
And, like originally we mailed him a copy to get a blurb. When you write a book like that, you send him out to all, every author you can, hoping to get that one sentence for the back. But, he really liked it. And, I told him that I was going to be in Florida in about a month or so. We decided to sit down and have lunch and just kind of talk about writing in general and just sort of feel out whether or not we'd be able to work together. And initially we didn't think it was going to happen because, I was a pantser at the time. I'm guessing you guys know the lingo, but like a pantser is basically somebody who writes by the seat of their pants. We don't know where we're going with the story.
Yeah,
right.
We've learned that recently.
Yeah, I did not know that.
Stephen King is the most famous one for that because on writing, he basically says if he doesn't know where the story's going, the readers aren't going to figure it out. The other camp is you write a detailed outline. So I was a hardcore pantser. Patterson was strictly outlines. That's all he did. He would spend a lot of time developing an outline and then, write the book. So we had lunch and we talked about all this, but it just didn't feel like we'd be able to work together just because of that. It's such a difference. So I went back home and then we ended up talking again, I guess about a month or so later. And he's like, you know what, let's go ahead and try it your way. Let's try and pants this novel. So we ended up doing that. We kind of went back and forth, and it was a crazy ride. Because Patterson, like a lot of people don't think he does the work. A lot of people don't think he writes. He does the work. He writes extremely fast. He's insanely smart and typically right. Like whenever he comes at you. I remember very early on in the book, there was a scene, and it's something you've seen a million times in TV. We've got our good guy has been accused of a crime. He's sitting in the interview room at the police department, at the police station. His attorney is sitting next to him. They're telling him all these things that he's basically going to go to jail for and what he did wrong. And like it needed to be in the book because we had to communicate a lot of information. But I wrote that particular scene. I sent it off to Jim and he sent me the scene back. And like, again, insanely fast, like maybe 30 minutes, he had rewritten the scene.
Oh my gosh. I thought you were going to say days.
No. And he changed the ending. So instead of just the scene playing out, at the end of it, the lawyer stands up, he knocks on the door, the cops open the door to let the lawyer out. Instead of just walking away, which is what I had him doing, he grabs the cop by the shirt collar, bashes his head against the wall, kills him, then turns to his client and says, "Okay, let's go." And like, that is how Jim handed the story back to me. The lawyer did that. God. So Jim sends it back to me like that. And he's like, "Okay, now you write what comes next."
Yeah. Do you want to pants this? You pants this. Here's what I give you.
That's a real yes and.
It basically became, me trying to paint him into a corner, him quickly getting out of that corner, painting me into another one. And if you read that book, it's called The Coast to Coast Murders. It is by far the twistiest thing I have ever done. It's just all over the place, but it was fun. So much fun. But then we finished it up and he's like, now I think you need to try this my way. So he sent me the outline for a book called The Noise, which was something that he had written. And it was basically his first stab at a horror novel.
Yeah.
And, we sat down, we wrote that one. And I saw how much faster the process was because when I wrote a book as a pantser, I would end up with maybe 140,000 words or so at the end of the novel. I ended up cutting about 40,000 of those words out. And it's almost like when you're, if you got a good piece of steak, you trim all the fat off and you just kind of get down to the lean piece of meat. That's sort of what you do with a book. But I would end up with a lot of words on the cutting room floor, a lot of wasted time. And with when we wrote that next one, The Noise, off the outline, there was none of that. Like we knew where the story was going.
Sure.
And the easiest way to explain it is, like now if I'm pantsing a novel, I spend a lot of time thinking about what I'm going to have to write next, what comes next. And if I have an outline in front of me, that same thinking, that brain power goes into how do I make what comes next better? Because now I already have the story, I can twist it and I can tighten it up.
Yeah, it's smart.
So I've kind of fallen into that camp. I feel like that's
you converted.
Yeah, I think I'm a convert.
Yeah.
Right now, I'm a complete mess. I'm writing 4 books at the same time, all in my 4MK series. 3 of them are prequels and 1 of them is a sequel. So I'm pantsing the first 3, and then the sequel I've got an outline for. So like I'm doing all of it.
You ever forget where you are in any of them? Get them confused?
If somebody took my coffee away, I'm sure that would happen. But yeah.
Or if you had to be like, here, somebody else help me out with it. You're like, all right, let me explain. You're like, I can't even explain where things are. I feel like there's so many balls in the air that it's like you can't even like.
Yeah,
you know what I mean?
Right. Even though they're prequels and a sequel, there's so much crossover and dependence on the original 3 novels. Like it made sense to just kind of do it all at once because it's all part of the same world.
Okay. Have you done any screenwriting?
I haven't. I've been asked to do that, and I am horrible at it. And I've got a podcast called Writers Inc. and we got to interview Gillian Flynn about Gone Girl because she wrote the screenplay for that.
Oh, she's on my list.
I selfishly booked her because I wanted to hear her process. I mean, she was working with David Fincher. It doesn't get any better than that.
Yeah, no kidding.
I've got a book called A Caller's Game, which is with Scott Free, Ridley Scott's company. And they asked me to write the screenplay for that. So I sat down and I hammered out the screenplay. And my movie was 4.5 hours long. So I turned that in and I was like, I don't know what else to take out. Like I took out the extra stuff when I wrote the book. Like, I don't know how to get this down to, an hour and 28 minutes or whatever, an action movie needs to be.
Real lean.
Yeah. So we booked Gillian Flynn on the podcast just so I could hear her process. And that was an interesting interview, but like, I don't enjoy it. It's not fun to me like writing the book is.
Yeah.
Every author that we've talked to has said basically when it comes to screenplays, it's not what they like to do.
Yeah.
Obviously, you love words and screenplays. It's sort of like the battle against words, right? It's like you're
essentially,
leaning out everything.
Yeah, it just kind of became this dreaded process. I would finish up my writing for the day. I'm like, I got another hour and a half left of my work day. Like I could work on the screenplay. I should work on the screenplay. And like, I hated doing it. And it took forever. So right now it's still sitting there at 4.5 hours. The funny thing is that one, A Caller's Game, it went through a lot of weird stuff. So when you have anything that's being produced in Hollywood, like you end up on this roller coaster. So like I got a phone call one night from my agent. He's like, Jennifer Garner loves this book. She wants to do it. So those conversations started happening. Jennifer Garner had a first look deal with Netflix, which basically means any project she wants to work on, Netflix gets the first opportunity to look at it and decide whether or not they want it. Netflix wanted the book, and then they basically threw $100 million budget out there. So like within a week or two, we had Jennifer Garner, we had Netflix, we had $100 million budget. And I'm like, I'm on cloud 9. And then the next week we get another phone call. Jennifer Garner has a scheduling conflict. She's not going to be able to do it. So Garner's gone. Netflix is gone. The budget's gone, and that's basically every project in Hollywood. I dread picking up the phone and even talking to my agent because like, it's always one of those kind of calls. one of these days I will eventually sit down and see something on the screen, but like nothing has actually made it there yet.
Yeah, that's got to be incredibly difficult to navigate. As for screenwriting, that's what I like to play around with.
Mhm.
I mean, it's just because it's like a puzzle and you're trying to write real visually. So you're constantly thinking of how to cut this down or how to convey this in a different way than you would normally be able to with prose.
Yeah, and I'm guessing you have budget in mind too, right?
Um,
I know for me that's come up quite a bit. So like when I wrote Collar's Game, all of my books prior to that had been optioned.
Yeah.
So like I kind of wrote Collar's Game almost as a dare to Hollywood. I was like I'm going to make a book that they can't film just to see what happens with it. So like I blew up like half of New York in this book.
Yeah.
Which is why like they needed that big budget in order to film it. But one of the things that I learned when I was trying to write the screenplay is like there's actually two different movies there. There's the big budget, giant one where we do blow up everything, and there was also another one that could be done at a very low budget where we kind of keep everything all within one room.
Right.
The story is about somebody who calls into a live radio show and basically confesses to murder and starts killing people on the air. So if we trim the story back
That's
to
fun.
just what takes place in that particular room, we can get that budget way down. But that became part of the hurdle for me as working on it as a screenwriter, because I didn't have that direction. Nobody was saying, well, we should do the big budget, or nobody was saying, no, we should do the low budget. They were just like, well, write it the way you see it. So unless I sit down and write both, then I'm still back, in this undecided camp. And when you do that work, like you don't know if it's actually going to get done. So you're wasting all that time. I would rather put those hours into just, hammering out another book and let somebody else figure it out.
Right.
Yeah, I get that. That is another like minefield to navigate. So what I've heard from different people in the industry is just write the best script possible, because no one really knows what they want until they see it. Everyone says they're going to follow trends and go with whatever is hot at the moment or coming up, but that's not necessarily the case. If you are writing something with a budget in mind, it's a little restricting. If you want to write a Godzilla movie, write the best one you possibly can. And if that's not going to be made, that's at least going to be like a calling card where people say, oh, this is so great. What about this other project?
Yeah, well, I think what's happened with me from a budget standpoint is I've had a lot of phone calls with, like Forum K is at Lionsgate right now. So they've got that in development as a streaming series. So I hear the conversations about budget. So when I'm actually writing a scene, even if it's a book that hasn't sold yet, I start thinking about, well, what is this going to cost to film? Like, do I really want to put this in there? Like those thoughts creep into your head, whether you want them to or not. If you enjoy screenwriting, I encourage authors to do it, because it does open doors, because nobody in Hollywood actually reads a book. They will sit down and read a screenplay. So even if they don't go with your screenplay, it might open the door where you get your screenplay in front of a director. He reads it, or she reads it, and they decide, well, this is a solid story, but I'd like my friend so-and-so, the director, to actually write the screenplay, or, whatever, but it might open that door.
Yeah.
So it's worthwhile. I mean, Dean Koontz, to this day, still writes a screenplay for every one of his novels, whether or not it's going to go anywhere or not. Yeah, he loves to do it. So he kicks out the novel, he kicks out the screenplay. He just basically creates all those pieces and floats them.
I'm fascinated by all of it. I also was just very interested going back to you driving around rock stars and such and doing that kind of thing. So you grew up in Florida and...
Yeah, so I was born in Illinois, a small town called Crystal Lake, which has nothing to do with the Friday the 13th movies. But my dad was a contractor, and just at one...
I love that you're a horror writer from Crystal Lake.
Yeah, from Crystal Lake. My dad was a contractor, and he got tired of the winters in Illinois, getting up at 5 a.m. and driving to a construction site and working out in that snow. Yeah. So he moved us to Florida, and I think I was 13 when we moved to Florida, and I honestly hated it. Yeah, because there's no seasons. It's crazy hot. You break into a sweat just walking out to the mailbox. Like I had a snowmobile for years. After we moved to Florida, like we took the track off, we put wheels on it. Like I missed having seasons. So when my wife and I, like we were in Pittsburgh when the book started selling, we realized, well, we don't have to live in Pittsburgh. Where in the world do we, want to live? And we just kind of started looking all over the country, and we kind of stumbled into this place by accident. We were visiting my publisher in Boston, and we decided to take a road trip through New Hampshire, and we stopped in Portsmouth. And somebody just told us you need to check out this little island called Newcastle before you leave. And, once we did the drive, we just kind of fell in love and knew that's where we wanted to be. Then it was just a matter of finding a house.
Did it feel more close to where you were, I guess, growing up?
It's hard to explain, but like it felt like home. I'm sure if I sat down with a psychologist or something, they could probably explain what the reasoning behind that is. But like, having 4 seasons a year, seeing snow out there in the wintertime, like getting up in the morning and it being cold outside and then slowly warming up. All that stuff to me feels, like the norm. Like that's the way it's supposed to be. So you take me out of that element, I feel off.
I just want to jump back to, did you say you took the treads off the snowmobile and put wheels on it?
Oh yeah.
So are you trekking around Florida on a snowmobile on wheels.
Me and my buddies used to race them. I think I was 14 or so when we did that. My best friend had an ATV, so like I would race the snowmobile against the ATV, and yeah, you do some stupid stuff when you're.
I don't think
I've
ever even seen that. That's crazy. That's awesome.
Yeah, and it's probably not the most absurd thing in Florida.
That's true.
Probably not the most absurd thing being raced in Florida.
Florida man takes treads off, snowmobile, and replaces with wheels. Good job.
Yeah.
So I'm guessing you were a reader in high school. Like, how do you end up in? I guess, like you said, your parents were like, "Hey, go business. You need a real job."
It was honestly, it was their fault, like because I grew up without a television in the house for many years. Like my parents just hated the idea of TV. When they eventually got one, we still only had 3 channels and they would hog it. So like we, as kids, we didn't watch any of it, but they would take us to the library all the time. So like my earliest memories are going to the library. And like I was reading by the time I was 3. By the time I started kindergarten, I'd read all the Hardy Boys and Nancy Drews, and I started on Charles Dickens and things like that.
Logical step. Right.
Yeah. Yes. I would write for fun. Like my sister is 15 months younger than me. So like I would write up, these little stories and staple the pages and created a library in my room. She'd check out my stories. I would charge her late fees.
Did you really?
Yeah. Oh yeah. Oh yeah. She still owes me money.
Interest compounds daily.
That's kind of where it started, So like writing, then as I got older, I did journaling and things like that. But like the writing fiction, even back then was, that was what I really enjoyed. So, even, when I got into high school, got into college, in the corporate world, like it was always that thing I would do for fun. Just like some people paint, some people, do this, they do that. I would write.
Did you write for like college newspaper or anything like that? Writing classes, like re-practicing your craft or trying to hone it a little bit there?
This is probably another one for psychologists, but like I really shied away from it. Like I was good at it, like to the point where like my English teachers would take my papers and they call my parents in and they like, you need to focus on this. This guy knows what he's doing. But they again would push me. They're like, writing is a good talent to have, if no matter what you're doing, like being a good writer will help you, but like it's not what you focus on. You focus on something else and it's a back thing. So I didn't really try it until I got out of the house. When I was in college, I was like, yeah, why not? Let's because I was running up student loan debt. I had to pay for that somehow. So why not write up some stories and see if I could sell them? And then once they actually started selling, and then people in that industry told me that I was good at it, like that encouragement really fed the machine.
Yeah, and then the late fees really add up too.
They do. Yeah, I got to tally that up next time I see her.
So what about actually? Okay, I've got 2 questions for you. One is, as you were writing, how did you get into horror and thrillers? I mean, that's pretty much your wheelhouse, right?
Yeah. So I loved Stephen King, and I still to this day. And, like I devoured his books and like, that's what I wanted to write. So I would sit down and I would write horror. Like my first novel was a horror novel, but, when I started selling, I had a conversation with Dean Koontz, and he told me, well, if you, want to write horror, like but like I wrote the horror novel, then I wrote the thriller novel. He's like, you need to keep doing that, like jump back and forth. As long as you keep moving around like that, the readers will come with you. And I had a similar conversation with Patterson, because Patterson didn't do that. And he basically told me what happened to him. So like his first book was called The Thomas Berriman Number, which nobody owns. I don't even think he has a copy of that one. But his second was Along Came a Spider, which sold really well. Yeah. And then he had, another one, basically the same book over and over again, serial killer stories. And they all did extremely well, but then he got a little burnt out on it. So he wrote a book called When the Wind Blows about a girl with wings, and his fans completely backlashed on him because they wanted that serial killer novel. So I've always had, Patterson on one shoulder, Dean Koontz on the other, kind of telling me their theories. Yeah, so my first book was horror. The second one was thriller. I just decided, I would keep with that trend. But what I've been finding is that I probably sell, 10 to 20 copies of a thriller novel for every horror novel.
Makes sense.
It's a much bigger market. The publishers, that's what they want to see. The booksellers want thrillers from me, but I still like writing horror. So I've tried to incorporate horror elements into my thrillers to try and mix it up a little bit.
Yeah, I'm reading Black Widow right now. I'm about halfway through.
Yeah, that one was fun. Yeah, Patterson called me up and he said, I want to write a book about a succubus. I'm like, okay. Yeah. And this was like in the middle of the Me Too movement. I was like, do you watch TV? This is probably a bad idea. But yeah, I love that book.
She's a very strong woman. She's a very empowered woman.
That's the thing. Like I that's one of my favorite female characters I think that I've written. She's very, very misunderstood for a monster.
Yes, I'm enjoying it.
What's your favorite kind of horror? Movies, books, anything you just look at and you think, oh, that's the greatest. Like, I love that. I wish I could write that.
Well, the cool thing about horror is it doesn't have to be big budget, right? Because it's in your head. Yeah, like it's your own brain that really scares you. So like from a movie standpoint, like I love It Follows. I don't know if you've seen that.
Love It Follows. I saw that in theaters, not knowing anything about it, and it was terrifying.
It was
great.
it was probably filmed for like $100 with cell phones. Like it was like
Yeah.
a really low budget movie, but like it really, really gets in your head.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what I love about it. And that's one of the things that I picked up, as I became more of a reader and I started devouring, stuff like Stephen King. Like I would pick those stories apart and figure out why they worked. And one of the things that always works for King is like he doesn't show you the monster. He lets you kind of conjure it up in your own mind. And that's what really gets you. You had mentioned Godzilla early on. Godzilla movies are fantastic until they show you Godzilla. Like if it's just
feel the same way.
Tiny little, thing, you see the water ripple or whatever, like that scares the piss out of you. But like the second they show you the monster, like that's when you pick up and go get a new popcorn or go to the bathroom or something at the theater.
It's good perspective. Yeah.
I've been a diehard Godzilla fan since I was a kid. I grew up watching all of those like cheesy rubber suit ones, and the new ones are fun. The ad for the newest one, this is the first time in my life I haven't really wanted to see a Godzilla movie. I mean, it looks like a Transformers movie. They're all over the preview. The whole thing is just monsters battling, which I normally like, but like, where's the thrills? Where's the scares?
For me, it's the CGI stuff that kills it.
Yeah.
It's not like somebody in a rubber suit to me looks more real. It comes across more scary. Like when I see the Incredible Hulk, like Lou Ferrigno painted green is scary to me compared to any Marvel Hulk. Like they don't frighten me.
Yeah,
I think our brains pick up on that.
Tactile.
Yeah, Godzilla is just one of those. Like it's just, and I think we've gotten desensitized too. Like, I mean, there's nothing they can throw on the screen at this point. I think that's going to surprise us. We've seen it all.
Right. But, you mentioned Stephen King before, like what he does so well, not showing the monster. I think some of the greats like Steven Spielberg, his movies are so effective because, I mean, if you look at his shots, it's never, looking right at the monster. It's always everyone's reaction. And so that's what, you're taking in. That's what works so well. And It Follows because there's no monster there. It's just people, you're just seeing someone's reaction and it's scary.
I've got a 6-year-old and I'm dying for the day where I can show her E.T. Like I keep showing her little bits and pieces, but she's just not quite there yet.
Yeah. Oh, such a good one.
We have a friend who, his daughter like saw Beetlejuice in like she was like 5. I'm like, that's a bit much. You're breeding a horror person.
Yeah, right. So we beat around that and I started talking a lot, but what besides King are you really into? Are there any other authors you like or the movies you like that, anything inspiring for your type of horror writing?
I'm all across the board. I tend to read mass market thrillers, mainly because that's what I'm writing. I know if I start reading sci-fi, I'm going to want to write a sci-fi, and like nobody wants that to happen. I mean, I read other stuff. Like I'll read romance, I'll read a Western. I don't really, if it's a good story, I'm all in, but it makes me want to dabble in that particular world. I love movies. I love TV. Right now, I'm actually watching something called Designated Survivor, which is it's an older series. I think it's from like 2017
is that
or so.
Kiefer Sutherland movie?
Yeah,
Kiefer Sutherland show where he's the.
Oh yeah.
I love the fact that we're in a world now where we can just, I can literally sit down and watch whatever I want, whenever I want.
Yeah.
Sure.
Whatever you're in the mood for. I'll bounce around. Sometimes it's thriller, sometimes it's horror. Just it all really depends. I don't know that I necessarily have a favorite. Like if it's a good story, it's told uniquely, I'm all in.
A good thriller is hard to write. I love thrillers. When you're sitting down for a thriller, like, do you have a concept, an outline is there anything that you normally gravitate towards, or do you try to kind of reinvent the story every time?
You mean when I'm writing them?
Yeah.
Because like I'll watch everything because I want to see if somebody comes up with something new.
Yeah.
Like I'm 53 now, so like I feel like I've seen everything, multiple times. Like it's not new anymore. Like I stood in line for Star Wars, so like I've been around a little bit.
Yeah.
But yeah, as I'm writing, like that constantly pops up into my head. A scene will come up, I'll paint myself into one particular corner. I start thinking about, well, what have I seen that, like this? And I have to make sure that I don't replicate what it's already been done, which makes it extremely difficult because you've got to come up with something new and something fresh. But I do it all the time. I mean, I'll basically paint myself in a corner, literally on purpose. Like if it makes sense for the character to walk through door A, I'll make them walk through door B just to change it up and then try to figure it out the next day. So even when I have an outline, a lot of times I'll divert from that outline, if it's worthy for the story. I've killed characters off mid-story that I didn't expect to kill at all, just because that particular twist seems to work, and then just kind of go with it.
What about concept? Thrillers are usually real logline heavy. That's what draws you into it. Like, where do you start there?
Well, with all my projects, I basically start with the same thing. I come up with the tagline for the book, so that one sentence. I basically think about if there was a movie poster, what sentence would be on that movie poster.
Yeah.
My favorite one is "In space, nobody can hear you scream." from Alien, because it sums everything up. You know, it's a scary movie. You know, it's going to be a thriller. You know this, you know that.
Yeah.
So that's kind of the gold standard. But for every book, I come up with that tagline. I come up with the back of book blurb. So basically 200 words describing what it's going to be about. A lot of times I'll come up with a title that can be a little bit more fluid, but like I have those pieces at the get-go. And that's basically what ends up on that PDF that I mentioned at the beginning that my agents and stuff, sort through when they want to pick my next story.
Okay.
And then from there, I come up with the characters, because to me, like the characters are the most important piece. Like plot is very important, when it comes to a thriller, but you can change it up. So like, I'll give you an example. I've got a book that's in the can right now. It's about a guy. He's at the airport and he looks over, he's standing in line waiting for the, in the TSA check line, and he sees a cell phone sitting on a couch. Somebody got up and it fell out of their pocket. So he walks over, and on the screen of the cell phone, there's a picture of a girl, there's a dollar amount, and it says where she is in the airport, and says, make it look like an accident. So he's looking at this phone, and then he walks it up to the TSA person to show it to somebody, because, like, what do you do with that? And by the time somebody actually looks at it, the screen timed out and he doesn't have the code, so he can't get back in to load up whatever it was. So he's the only person who saw this. In the initial outline, this guy was a cop, because it just kind of made sense for, a cop to kind of fall into this situation. But then I started working on the outline itself, and I changed it and I made him a plumber, because, like changing it up like that adds this whole other dynamic to the story, and completely changed it and basically brought that character to life for me. So I'll do weird things like that to try and, make it work.
Taking away his toolbox, essentially.
Yeah, because if it's a cop, then it's Bruce Willis, it's Die Hard, and we've all seen that movie, and nobody wants to see it again.
Right.
But
he's a do-good guy already, so he feels obligated to do something. Whereas if you're a plumber, you're like, I don't know, I could insert myself into this situation or not, and if I do, I'm going to be completely unprepared for whatever.
Yeah, and honestly, that's the nice thing about having an outline. And when I talk to writing students, or when I mentor people, I tell them to approach it this way, because if you come up with a change like that, it's real easy to make a wholesale change through an outline. It took me 20, 30 minutes or so to completely update it with that scenario. But if it was a book that I was pantsing, that could be weeks to a month worth of work to go back and have to adjust.
Sure.
So you create, in my world, I come up with a tagline, I come up with a backup book blurb, then I come up with the outline, then I tweak it, with my characters. And once I've got all those pieces, then I hit the ground running.
Okay. Do you listen to music when you're writing?
I actually listen to a Thunderstorm soundtrack. So basically white noise.
Really?
This dates all the way back to my corporate days, because, I was basically still working in the corporate world trying to pound out, the beginnings of a novel. I had very limited time to do that. So I basically kind of fell into like a Pavlov's dog type situation. I learned that if I wrote in the same place every day, that was helpful. Listening to the Thunderstorm soundtrack, the second I hear, thunder and lightning, my brain immediately goes into writer mode. So I could put on those headphones and I could pound out 300-400 words in a couple of minutes, like really quick. It just kind of throws me into that world, and then I can get back out again. With
That's
music,
wild.
I used to listen to like soundtracks. That was very helpful.
Like scores.
Yeah, but the writing tended to follow that. So like if the music picks up the pace, then the writing would pick up the pace, and vice versa.
Right.
Yeah.
Nothing with lyrics, because lyrics would find their way into the story. But Thunderstorms, that's always been my go-to. It always seems to work, and
Something flat.
yeah, just
I was gonna
something
say,
drown
yeah.
everything else out.
I will say our friend that I was just saying about Beetlejuice also is a savant for scores. It's really weird. He can put it on.
Yeah.
He'll tell you exactly where what that is, what movie it's from, what part, and all that stuff. It's really strange.
Beetlejuice has a good soundtrack too. That would be a cool one.
True.
Because it's Danny Elfman.
Yeah. There you go. How did you land on Thunderstorms? Just out of curiosity, does it set the sort of tension for you, or is it?
Sunshine isn't as fun to listen to.
I think it actually came from being in Florida. So, back when I was younger, like the weather in Florida is a mess, right now, just like everywhere else in the world. But we used to get a thunderstorm that would come through, and it would only last for like an hour, but it would be a bad thunderstorm. I mean, thunder and lightning, crazy wind, like just insane, almost like a hurricane would come through. We lived right on the coast, and then it would clear up and it'd be gone, so sunny, then crazy storm for an hour, then sunny again. I kind of found that when that was going on, like I was able to write, more. I think it's just because it drowned out everything else that was happening in the world.
So how about when you're not listening to thunderstorms and you're actually listening to music? Writing aside, I'm assuming you're pretty into music because you got a job with BMG. Did I get that right?
Yeah. Well, it was BMG, distribution.
Yeah.
Yeah. So back then I listened to absolutely everything. And now we're in the same kind of world, like I was mentioning with TV, you can listen to anything that you want, whenever you want.
Yeah.
Which is a very unique situation. But like, I've got a 6-year-old daughter. So like, I'm kind of reliving music that I like through her. Like, she heard the Beatles for the first time, and like, she's a Paul Simon fan. And, we've got all these different decades that we can pull from. I mean, my go-tos, I think Guns N' Roses is probably my favorite band.
Nice.
And I still listen to that. There's not a whole lot of new stuff, like this music today, like I'm getting to that age where like, like it doesn't sound like music to me anymore, like not to like the stuff that I'm used to.
You got to look.
Yeah, it's out there.
I'm sure it's out there. But... Yeah, but I mean, for the most part, like any discovery I do at this point, it's like it's with my daughter, with my wife, So like I'm listening to the stuff 6-year-olds would listen to. So,
Taylor Swift.
Oh, lots of Taylor Swift. Yeah.
Yes, indeed. So you met Guns N' Roses. They were one of the bands that you took around for, I don't know, a couple days, week, something.
Yeah. That was a crazy one. And they were basically at the height of their career. I was backstage it was Joe Robbie Stadium at that point. I don't know what they call it nowadays in Miami for their concert on New Year's Eve. So it was Guns N' Roses on New Year's Eve.
Wow.
And that stadium was completely packed.
Were they on before the ball dropped?
I'll be honest with you, I wasn't very sober for that particular experience.
Okay. All right. That's fair.
Yeah.
They probably weren't either. So
yeah. No,
so that helps that.
I don't know that they ever
who in that
were.
Stadium was. I mean, actually, if you were to really do a percentage on that, like
low percentage. So were you allowed to geek out at all?
Once the bands hit the stage, I was, because like once they were in their environment, they were doing their thing. I knew I didn't have to worry about anything. But like the second that they got off the stage, like, I had to make sure that they got to their signings to their, because a lot of people don't realize, like, before a concert, there's press that is usually done. There's usually meet and greets that are set up. There's interviews that are happening.
Yeah.
So like they're not just sitting in a room waiting to go on. Like in most TV shows, like they show them, like in the green room, but like that's really not the case. So I was just basically making sure that they did all of those things. Got back on their bus, but while they were actually on the stage, like I got to enjoy myself.
That's awesome.
Were any artists come through that were extremely difficult, uniquely difficult, I guess?
I don't know that I want to go there. let's just say they're all unique.
Okay.
I think for people to get to that particular level in life, I think they tend to be a type A personality. So they tend to be loud, they tend to shine. But sure. you get used to dealing with that. I used to love being in the recording studio too. There was a studio in Miami called Criteria, and I think there were 6 different studios in there. And I remember I was there with the guys from Poison. They were recording. Oh God, I don't even remember what the album was.
Open Up and Say Ah.
It was their biggest album. I think it was their second or third. Either way, like I was in the break room, and then Julio Iglesias walked in, and like because they were sharing a studio, and he brought a basket of fruit for the guys from Poison. So like you could sit in the lobby there and just run into, like who knows, like just an insane number of people.
That's wild. Yeah. So you got to watch some of the bands record.
Yeah. And that was, to me, was always, one of the, again, it was a fun thing because I was in the booth, like I knew that they weren't going anywhere, so I just got to watch them create, and like watching some of these bands, develop some of that music, it's an amazing process. I mean, like writing a story is one thing, but, thinking about bass lines and guitar riffs and this and that, and, kind of bringing it all together. So it's really cool to be able to witness that.
Do you play any instruments?
I was just about to ask the exact same thing.
I used to play piano, but only to the extent that, if I heard, a song that I liked, I could kind of mimic it, which I think was more the autistic side of me, but like I never pursued it.
It's funny because I feel like if you're around that and you see it, and kind of like what you were just saying with the writing, like if I read this, I'm going to want to write a Western or whatever. Like for me, I'm like, God, to be a fly on the wall. I'm very much a music, Aaron is as well, music guys. But like to be a fly on the wall, essentially what you kind of were in the studio setting, doing that. I feel like I would A, love that, but B, just be like, you know what, I need to get back into that. I need to do that. That looks amazing. You know what I mean? So it's interesting.
Yeah, I mean, I've dabbled in it back in the day, but I was never good at it. Like I couldn't
That's
craft
also
a
nice
song.
to know yourself.
Yeah.
That's good. How did that end? How did you get out? So basically, did you go into then writing, or did you just get sick of chasing rock stars around? Or
I got in a bad motorcycle accident.
Oh no shit.
So I was coming home from a recording studio. It was about 3:00 in the morning, and I was going down Federal Highway in Fort Lauderdale. And it was raining, and I was on a motorcycle, and somebody pulled out in front of me to make a left-hand turn, and they just stopped in my lane to wait for traffic on the other side to clear up. And I ended up hitting the car.
Oh, God.
I was doing about 55, 60 or so. I hit him full on in the front quarter panel.
Oh.
And I went over the car, landed about 100 feet down the road, and just kind of destroyed my right leg. My helmet cracked in half. I rolled for probably another couple 100 feet.
Yeah.
But I spent about 2 years after that in, various hospitals getting surgeries and, learning to walk again. And by the time I came out of all that, like that business, just like anything else in entertainment, is all who you know. And those pieces are very fluid. They move very quickly.
Yeah.
it basically just kind of
Wow.
everything just shifted around me. So by the time I was able to actually do anything anymore, like I was out of it, whether I wanted to be or not.
Yeah, that was the universe saying, this is not your path.
Yeah. And honestly, like it was fun, but like, I couldn't make a living at it, like it paid the bills, but like, not long term. It wasn't a career move. So,
Right.
it was
You get
probably
good stories out of it and it's fun, but yeah. God bless you. Right. That's not the way you want that to transition. Better to have your wife say, "Hey, let's pick up stakes and go," as opposed to the universe saying, "Hey, let's throw a car in your path."
You get a lot of writing done when you're in a hospital bed for a long time.
Okay,
Yeah,
that's fair.
No,
That's fair. Maybe it's
That's a
like
good one.
seminal,
Yeah,
sort of focus
I think
thing.
everything happens for a reason, I think.
So I just wanted to ask. So I just was looking up, stalking your bio and saw that you were noticed by, I guess, the guy from Circus, and that got you into the 25th parallel. So I know Circus. It was funny. Aaron and I, right before you came on, we were looking. I was like, "What's Circus Magazine doing nowadays?" I was like, "Let me go check that out." Their website is fantastic if you're into really old, strange websites, as I am.
I mean, it's straight out of 1996.
Yes.
Is Circus still around?
Oh, it's something. I don't know. Their website, if you go to Circus Magazine, it's there, and they're trying to, I don't know if they're actively selling. circusrockmag.com for all of our 3 listeners or 4 listeners we have now.
Yeah, so the guy you're talking about, his name is Paul Galata, and he was very, very instrumental, I think, in getting me into writing in the first place.
That's awesome.
Yeah, I was in college. I had written, again, I shied away from it. Like I was good at it, but like I just didn't want to do it as a full-time thing because everybody told me not to. But I had written a paper about the Berlin Wall coming down, and there was a concert that Bon Jovi had done. Like a bunch of bands flew over to do a concert when the wall came down. So I wrote a paper about that. And my English teacher loved it. And she's like, you need to pursue this. You need to pursue this. And I was like, nah, it's just something I do for fun. She sent it off to Paul Galata, who was the editor of Circus Magazine. And then he reached out to me and said, I'm starting a magazine in Florida called 25th Parallel. Would you like to be part of that? And, as long as I could do it on the side, it wasn't going to interfere with, what my parents were telling me basically I had to do, then I would do it. And it was an eclectic cast. I mean, one of the other guys that was hired around the same time as me was Brian Warner, who later became Marilyn Manson.
Yeah.
And I remember one of his very first assignments, they sent him down to interview the Miami Dolphins. So imagine Marilyn Manson interviewing the Miami Dolphins with Dan Marino and those guys.
Oh my gosh, that's great.
Yeah, but that really got me, both feet, I think, into that world, and it made me think this is something I want to do. But then I also saw what my parents were saying, like a lot of people were getting by, check to check, like I got to sell a story, pay my rent, I got to do this, I got to do that, and like I didn't want to be that person, and they were older than me, they had 20, 30 years on me, and they were struggling check to check, and I didn't want to be that guy either. So part of it was a cautionary tale, but like the allure of just that, like, writing for a magazine when you're, in your late teens, early 20s, it's you can't pass that up. You can't beat it.
It seems like Almost Famous kind of thing. It doesn't have the same trajectory, obviously, but it has a little bit of that vibe to it.
Yeah. Yeah.
What kinds of things were you writing for the 25th Parallel? Like what were some of the, so did you interview the Miami Dolphins?
No, like
did you interview your coworker about his musical career?
The funny thing was, like once I got my foot in the door there, it was more or less, like what can you write for us? Like because they already knew that I was working for BMG and that I would be able, I had access. So a lot of those stories took place. The first interview I actually did for 25th Parallel was Davy Jones. If you guys remember Davy Jones from the Monkees. Yeah. So
awesome.
he was in Miami and he was doing a production of Oliver. And he's my, again, my very first interview. He's for them, one of the very few celebrities that I actually met, at the beginning of all this stuff. And, we sat down and we talked, and like people were coming up to him asking him to play Daydream Believer, which was like the Monkees' big hit. And, like he would smile at him. He'd be like, yeah, absolutely. I'm going to be all over that, once we finish this up. And then like the second they walked away, I saw that smile go away. I saw the guy, who had been hearing that same question for 20, 30 years.
Yeah.
And, and that's where the story was. So that's basically, part of what I wrote up, like this, he's a talented guy, but like he basically got caught up in that, like that's what everybody always wanted from him.
Yeah.
So that I did that one. I wrote a piece on Michael Jackson, but I think everybody did back in the day.
For the record, I would ask Davy Jones to sing Last Train to Clarksville. So I would not have said Daydream Believer.
I think any monkey song at that point would have probably been something he did not want to do. Like it just.
Right. So you did so Michael Jackson piece just on.
Yeah, I did a Michael Jackson piece. A girl that I was dating at the time, she had started at the Art Institute in the music business and had moved on into film and TV. and she was working on a lot of the productions that were happening down there. Back in the early 90s, a lot of producers saw Florida as kind of the next Hollywood. They were offering a lot of tax breaks in order to film down there. So she worked on movies like Fair Game and True Lies, Cape Fear with Robert De Niro and Nick Nolte. Yeah. So she would throw me stories. A lot of times I worked as an extra. Like I'm an extra in a gazillion different movies that they filmed down in that area.
How about
that was always fun. Yeah, if you watch Cape Fear, there's a parade scene, and there's one spot where I'm standing behind Nick Nolte, and then they flash, and he's having a conversation. So they flash to the other person, flash back, and I'm standing on the other side of Nick Nolte wearing different clothes because we filmed it over a couple different days.
Continuity error. God, that's great.
Yeah. So lots of fun stuff like that. But like I wrote up everything that I could. Very few of it actually got like published under my own name, because when you're writing that much, you just use a ton of pen names, to try and get it out there. Especially when if you hash up an interview, you interview one celebrity, you put it out to 10 different magazines, all under different names as different interviews. You got to learn to hustle.
So I was just gonna a minute ago say credit to you for recognizing that you didn't want to be in that position as a teenager. I mean, most teenagers are happy to get a paycheck or happy to just be involved in something. But the fact that you were able to look at these older guys and say, that's not where I want to be in 20, 30, whatever, how many years.
Yeah, I think the world has changed a little bit there. Like back then, like a lot of my buddies were coming up in the corporate world. So like I was basically keeping up with the Joneses. I had to try and figure out how to mimic that.
Sure, it's getting late. So we add a travel aspect to this. We like to know what everyone calls home, because I feel like that place influences a lot of people's voices. Whatever their surroundings were when they came up. So starting there, you bounced around a bit. Where would you call home? Illinois, Florida?
No, honestly, it's here in New England. Like I love the life that we built for ourselves here. The island itself just feels like home.
Yeah,
it's a lot like stepping back in time when you come on this island, because we don't get mail delivery. We have to walk to the post office to pick up our mail.
Really?
The elementary school is right across the street from my house, so my daughter can walk there. She's 6 years old, but she can walk to school by herself if she wants to with her friends, and it's perfectly safe. That vibe is what I grew up with. Like as a kid, I used to walk to school, but like, in Pittsburgh, if you let your kid walk to school, like they called, child services on you, you get in trouble.
Right.
So like that old school type environment, that to me feels like home. Looking out my window and seeing the seasons. I mean, even today, like it's gloomy, it's raining, but like it's New England, and like it feels right to me.
Yeah.
So I guess it's here. Like I haven't been back to Illinois since I was a kid. I probably need to make that trip. But, I've been all over the world, traveling for the book stuff. And like, this is the only place that really feels like my home base.
Do you still have a home in Florida? Do you still go back there, or are you guys basically 100% now?
We don't have a home in Florida anymore. We've got a ton of properties because of the rental stuff that my wife does.
Oh, sure.
But I honestly, like, I couldn't even tell you how many she owns right now. At last count, I think it was 12. And we rarely stay in them because, like if we stay in them, then she's basically losing the, whatever she would have brought in with the tenant being in there. So even when we go on vacation, we end up staying someplace different rather than the places we actually own.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
So the question of this is, you have a visitor for the day. They're coming to visit you at your home where you are now, noon till evening. What are you going to do?
Well, we actually do that a lot because people come to New England to visit.
Oh, yeah.
So we usually I take people on a walk around the island. I do a run every day. It's the whole lap of the island. It's 4.2 miles. So I basically do a circle.
That's great.
So when somebody comes to visit, I'll basically walk them down to the beach. We have a private beach here, so we'll go there, kind of hang out on the rocks and kind of look out at the ocean. You can see a few lighthouses from there, so it's just a really cool place. Neat vibe.
Yeah.
A lot of old buildings. There's houses around here that were built in the 1600s. So that's fun to look at. Huh. Then we hit some of the local tourist traps. Kennebunkport's not far from here. Portsmouth, Salem, and Massachusetts. It's an hour away, so we visit that one quite a bit.
Okay.
Might bump into Paul Tremblay there at the Salem Witch Museum.
Yeah, I haven't seen him there. I know Paul, but I've never actually run into him there. But I'm sure we've probably both been there at the exact same time and not known it.
Are there any establishments on your island? Like, are there businesses? Are there restaurants? Are there bars? Or is there anything?
People have tried. So there used to be taverns here, like back in the day. This just used to be, it's funny because like it's all waterfront, but like this was probably the poorest part of town back in the day because it was fishermen.
Yeah.
So they basically stumble out of their house and get on their boat and go, get lobsters or whatever it is they did.
Right. So no one developing.
Yeah, nobody developing, and now at this point they don't allow it. It's all historical. So there's we've got our post office, we've got our town hall. There's a little gazebo in front of it with the police station.
Mm-hmm.
There's a tiny little restaurant cafe called the Islander, where you can get some coffee and ice cream and things like that. But not really a sit down dinner kind of place. It's possible that may eventually encroach on here, but I'm kind of hoping it doesn't.
Yeah.
Because a lot of local tourist traps, like a Kenny Bunkport, those types of places, like they're just overrun with tourists. Like there's just people everywhere.
You don't actually take a ferry to get there, right? It's like connected by a bridge or something.
There's currently two bridges. One of them is kind of sketchy because the water level keeps rising above it. So they're either gonna have to replace it or it's gonna have to go away.
That seems problematic for a bridge. Our bridge is underwater.
It's high tide right now, so it's probably underwater right now. They've been talking about raising it, I guess, for years before we got here, and it hasn't happened yet. So sooner or later, I'm guessing it will.
Yeah, we're in Baltimore, so
I was gonna say, send an oil tanker.
our bridge is literally underwater right now.
Yeah, send an oil tanker at it. I'll take care of it.
Yeah, that's a whole other nastiness.
I'm picturing what's the Mike Flanagan thing on Netflix, the
House of Usher,
Midnight Mass.
Oh, midnight.
Oh yeah.
It's actually like
that town.
He could have easily filmed that here.
That's
I literally have a cemetery in my backyard.
Do you
Oh,
really?
wow.
Yeah, the real estate agent didn't show it to us until like the third visit. I saw it back there. Like she kind of steered clear, and I'm like, I write scary books, right? Like you probably should have led with that.
Right.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah, like it's crazy old. Like you can't read anything on the tombstones. I think there's like one date that says 1834 you can still make out, but like everything else is just kind of rubbed away.
My mom had a friend who would collect gravestones, so it's like a thing where they go up and they do etchings of them for like old things.
She wasn't like stealing gravestones.
No,
that'll get you in trouble.
I don't think so.
Yeah, we get a lot of people doing that because cemeteries up here are a weird thing. Like even though it's on my property, it's technically owned by the people that are buried there or their descendants. So like we have to allow people to get to it. So there's a little path from the streets that people can walk in there.
So when we want to send him our manuscript, that's our in. We're going to come in through the cemetery and be like, JD, here's my manuscript.
There you go.
Nice. Lord. All right. Well, we've kept you on here long enough, and I'm sure you have lots of writing to do. You're in the middle of 4 books. And
it was a very welcome break. I appreciate it.
Oh, good. Awesome. Yeah, we loved having you. I have a million more questions, so hopefully we can keep in touch.
Yeah, absolutely. Anytime.
All right. Have a good afternoon.
Yeah,
Take care. It was super nice meeting you.
Yeah, thanks for your time.
All right.
Take care.
See ya.